going to hopefully make this bigger. So we do know that heat waves and intense rainfall are already accelerating the deterioration of assets and increasing maintenance costs. We know that assets are not independent pieces of infrastructure. They're essentially systems that underpin mobility, safety, economic activity, and livability. And that traditional like-for-like renewals are really locking in that vulnerability and higher long-term costs. Councils need approaches that justify doing things differently. And this is where I'll pass to Resilient South Stefan to tell you a little bit about RAMP.
Thanks very much, Fiona. I think that a lot of the material that I normally talk about has been covered, but briefly, I mean, whenever I talk about this stuff, I sort of begin by saying for local government, assets and infrastructure is one of our biggest responsibilities and definitely our biggest budget investment. The vast majority of the revenue that we collect from the community is tied up in creating, maintaining and renewing assets that support the services that our communities rely on every day. And our capacity to raise more revenue is really, really limited. Pretty much every local government candidate stands on a platform of no rate rises or really limited rate rises, and that makes continuing to maintain our assets really, really challenging. And it also means that our long-term sustainability really does depend on making good investment decisions, because simply maintaining assets that we have indefinitely, even when the value they deliver is declining, is certainly not sustainable. And equally, continuing to plan, build and renew assets without accounting for the climate, environmental and transition risks that are associated with them is going to become increasingly difficult to justify. Adelaide has been reasonably lucky to date in that we haven't had sort of major sort of infrastructure failures related to climate, but we can certainly see them occurring elsewhere, and we know that they're in the future, so we need to be preparing for those. The challenge is that changing the way that we make those decisions is really not easy. Asset investment is really deeply interconnected with council planning, finance, governance and service delivery, and decisions about how we invest and what we build and what we maintain and what we decommission and what level of service we provide is pretty complicated and politically sensitive. We know that our chambers have pretty strong feelings about this, but it also has really long-term consequences for our community. The RAMP pilot was undertaken a bit over 5 years ago now, started a bit over 5 years ago as the Resilient South Council's initial foray into attempting to integrate climate change into our asset management systems. And that was a big challenge. And I think that it's one that has positioned us a lot further down the path than we were, but also gave us a bit of a reality check about how complicated that is and how big a change management piece it is for one council, let alone four. The ERAD project builds upon the foundations established through the RAMP pilot, and it has taken the next step by starting to build an investment case lens. So this project has developed tools that help us estimate the costs of different interventions, quantify their benefits to the community, and better understand the costs of inaction. And that helps us move from the idea of, oh, this is maybe a worthwhile thing to do, to actually being able to start to cost those things out. The ultimate goal, of course, is to equip councils with stronger evidence for internal decision-making in business cases, while also improving our ability to attract external investment for resilience initiatives. Because Resilient South is a complex beast with 4 councils, it was nice with this project to be able to just focus on one council, sit at the City of Holdfast Bay, and for the ERAD team to work with just one group, one set of asset managers and professionals across council, and look at not one asset class, but one sort of asset group, and the road corridor assets. So we were able to constrain it down as kind of a proof of concept that we can then apply to other asset types. So I guess today's session is really an opportunity to explore how this approach can help Holdfast Bay and hopefully other councils make more informed, transparent and forward-looking investment decisions in a changing climate. So I'll hand you back over to Sairo. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you for all your advice and guidance over the course of this project. It's been greatly appreciated. I'm going to start sharing again and pass to my colleague Russ Wise, who's leading the Enabling Resilience Investment Initiative at CSIRO.
Thanks, Shona. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, so the Enabling Resilience Investment approach was used in the ERAD project to help progress the RAMP agenda. And the ERI approach comprises a framework, methodologies, and a set of capabilities that we've been developing and testing in a range of place-based initiatives around Australia over the last 6 or 7 years. This has been done with the objective of building and demonstrating more integrated systems and scenarios-based approaches to factoring climate risks and resilience into organizational planning and investment decision-making. More specifically, the approach involves collaborating with stakeholders to enhance understanding and to build assessment capabilities that link climate impact analysis with economic and financial assessments to evaluate the performance of existing and novel risk reduction and resilience interventions under a range of climate and development scenarios. And in doing so, the approach also supports stakeholders to identify governance and capability constraints and helps develop activities that can be undertaken to address these. Ultimately, the aim of ERI, which really does align with that of the RAMP program, is to enable better climate risk-informed decisions within Council's real constraints. So I'll hand back to you, Shona.
Thanks, Russ. So now we're going to give you a little taster for what we did with our colleagues at the City of Holdfast Bay. As Stefan mentioned, we were focusing really down onto roads, reframing roads as corridors. So in this particular project, we looked at roads as corridors of integrated systems rather than individual assets. We know that corridors help deliver transport, drainage, cooling, shade, so many other things, and that climate impacts rarely affect a single asset in isolation. They tend to cascade across pavements, trees, drainage, and even the users of these road corridors. So planning at the corridor level helps reveal opportunities of treatments or interventions that can potentially have higher overall value and mitigate some of the risks. So working closely with our colleagues, we started with a vision for these resilient road corridors. This helped us to surface some of our assumptions about what would make for a resilient road corridor and to sort of unpick some of those attributes. So while the picture is from the city of Onkaparinga and it was just so wonderful we wanted to use it here, the words are very much for the city of Holdfast Bay. So their vision was the future road corridors were resilient, community-focused places that supported well-being and the local economy, encouraged walking and cycling, and protected nature in a changing climate. So this actually gave us our guiding star for what we were going to do. We also really wanted to understand the context, and we wanted to build on some of the lessons that the RAMP had actually started to develop. And in particular, the RAMP pilot noted that significant work was actually required in helping sort of tailor these technical solutions to organizations. It wasn't so much that you could just take what happened and use it in your own organization, and that there was an underinvestment in the detailed delivery planning. So right up front, we were working with some colleagues from Monash University and their Transitions Dynamic Framework to develop a shared understanding of the current context at the City of Holdfast Bay. And so it produced a somewhat traffic light report of the various elements that would be needed to transition to these resilient road corridors. So across the top, you have champions, platforms for connecting, knowledge, projects, and guidance. And then you've got on the left-hand side going down, the sort of level of transitions phase from understanding or awareness of the issue to embedding new change in practice. And you can see here at the beginning of the project, this was the traffic light summary that our colleagues at the City of Holdfast Bay came up with. So some things they're doing very well, they're in green. Some things that they're sort of in the process of changing or shifting in the yellow, and then further on down the pathway, activities that they'll get to in the red. Now, our project was only a year or just over a year, and so we couldn't do everything. So the purple diamonds were areas that the ERAD project in particular was going to try and help the City of Holdfast Bay work on. Okay, so one of the earlier aspects that we worked on was around climate risks in Holdfast Bay. So Adelaide University was a core member of our team, and they really helped us focus on the hazards, vulnerability, and exposure analysis to inform decision making. So we really focused on heat waves and fluvial flooding as priority climate risks for road corridors. These risks were assessed under current conditions or baseline conditions. And we had 2 future climate scenarios that helped us understand how the pressures evolved. So these scenarios are from the ramp, so we were building on those. So one was the green route, which is a lower carbon emissions route, and one, the highway, was a higher carbon emissions route. And these also related to the IPCC scenarios. We use these to look at 4 key impacts: road surface rutting under extreme heat, road sub-base damage from fluvial flooding, tree suitability under rising temperatures, and active transport disruption. Critically, this is different from what might happen as business as usual, because it takes that systems approach to look at the corridor as a whole and links multiple future scenarios. It examines the upfront costs and future benefits and helps create a balanced, stronger case for doing differently. And it helped with the incorporation of future risks into decisions under these different climate scenarios. One of the outputs that we created of the project was this dashboard that actually helped visualize some of these risks using the climate models and the scenarios. You can see here pictures from that dashboard under the road rutting depths for different sections of road, what happens when you use different binders and materials under these scenarios. So decision makers in the City of Holdfast Bay can interact with the scenarios and the different types of binders. We've also looked at visualizing on the bottom left the tree suitability and which tree species are suitable based on the climate conditions. And decision makers can use this dashboard to drill in and see which trees are suitable and where. And then a similar visualization for the flood damage. I'm actually going to pass to my colleague Pete from Value Advisory Partners now, who'll take you through some of the work we did on resilience investment cases.
Thanks, Shona, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So I'll just start off with the definition of what is a resilience investment case. So this is one of the key components of the Enabling Resilience Investment Framework and of the work we did through ERAD. It describes an investment logic, which is packaged with a set of resilience building treatments to address defined place-based service needs and address some of those climate risks that Shona was talking about. At this stage in the process, it doesn't target a specific funding source as yet. It just documents the logic underpinning that potential investment decision, and then comes up with bundles of solutions that can be identified and prioritized for decision making. And those can be tailored to specific, tailored to specific funding sources as those opportunities arise. And this can be through internal funding or external sources as well, such as grants. Now, we'll go through quickly here. There's sort of a rapid fire animations on this slide, but this is an example of a few treatment options addressing a risk of heat. There's the road corridor. The treatments we had identified in this were trees and road surface binder. The effect of those treatments are to the function to provide shade for trees and a cool seal coating on the road surface. Both of these things have the effect of reducing heat on the road surface and thus reducing the amount of road rutting that would occur over time. And there you see some of the risk work that was done. And what is the impact of this treatment? It improves the asset life and reduces the maintenance, and thus that reduces the cost to council And there's a similar chart a couple slides from now, which I'll dive deeper into, but that's sort of the financial implications of applying these different road surface binder treatments and trees to provide shade. Next slide, please. So we developed a resilience investment case tool, which the council can use to make decisions about what different treatment options they want to test and assess their effectiveness against and benefits against their cost. So on one side, there's inputs, which include which future climate scenario you're interested in selecting, a threshold for which road segments you want to include in your as part of your set of assets you're going to treat, the treatment type, so which type of road surface binder would you like to use, and then the associated costs for each of those different types of road surface binders. Then we move across to the outputs in the tool. And there's two main implications for these outputs. So one is kind of the present value or the benefits of applying these treatment options to the selected road segments that we had in the investigation area. And you can see compared to a base case, what does applying those treatments do? And the next is for asset and long-term financial planning implications. So the number of assets being treated, the renewal period for those assets, and sort of understanding what that means, what the financial and economic implications of those are. So this is an example of the output of that model from a cost perspective. So these are cumulative costs over time in that given climate scenario for those different surface binders. And you can see the implications of the shorter term cost. So the green line is sort of the highest cost, but highest effectiveness or heat mitigation impact for that binder type. So you're having those costs occurring earlier on. The different treatments show varying cost profiles because the asset renewal timing changes depending on the surface binder. You're extending the asset life variably depending on what surface binder you're applying. The red line represents the where the analysis period in the tool, you can select the analysis period over which you're evaluating this. So in this example, it's 2056, and the cumulative cost for each of those binders at that period. And then you can see also the longer term implications and costs of the BAU. So that's the orange line. If you just kept using the same surface binder over a longer period of time, your cumulative costs are higher than if you're applying the treatments. So those all have implications for how you bundle, which interventions or treatment options you're selecting over which assets, and then what the financial and economic implications of implementing those are over time, and using that to inform decisions about your asset planning. And that's back to you, Shona.
Thanks very much, Pete. I personally have learned a lot from the VAP team about economics. It's not my strong suit, so you'll have to bear with me for the next slide, which I'm presenting on behalf of our Swinburne colleagues. Sarada Tapswan will be able to answer any questions when we get to it. But this is a similar graph about tree planting under the various scenarios. In the middle line, that's completely flat. If the climate was to remain static and you just replace dead trees, this is what would happen to your canopy. But unfortunately, we know the climate is shifting, and if you only replace dead trees, your canopy will actually decline over time because the trees will not be adapted. So if your goal, which we know it is in Adelaide, is to enhance your canopy because they provide cooling, shading, cleaner air, and much better health, then under future climate conditions, councils will need to start to expand beyond a replacement-only approach to plant more trees than they lose, and to make sure that the trees that they plant are climate adapted moving forward. Okay, so that's some of the more technical side of the project. We also worked very hard with our colleagues from City of Holdfast Bay who were very kind and spent a lot of time with us about how to weave that resilience into their current practice. So we worked with them to identify how and where current roles and decisions are undertaken and what blocks these space-based or corridor scale decisions. We looked at how to strengthen connections across the council, which is actually already fairly connected, and incorporate diverse considerations of resilience into on-ground implementation. We also explored opportunities to invest in leadership and staff awareness and adopt a staged pragmatic change pathway rather than a full organisational redesign. And this actually enabled a focus more on integrating decisions, not just on better analysis. So ERI was a lot more than a set of reports. We provided data sets, hazard assessments, and adaptable open source tools, which critically councils can update as their decision processes change and their information changes. This helped prioritize actions. The evidence-informed investment tools help support decision-making and develop cases. And we've developed lots of practical guidance for integrating resilience considerations into existing council practice, alongside recommendations for some larger changes when they're appropriate through an adaptive change plan. So collectively, ERAD has helped councils gain a defensible and persuasive basis for prioritising investment in resilient infrastructure. Decisions are able to be more transparent, evidence-based and future-focused. The corridor scale thinking unlocks better value from limited capital budgets. It can strengthen ability to compete for external funding. And these adaptable tools and methods are quite transferable, we hope, across Resilient South and similar councils over time. What we think is that this might help other local governments by helping climate risk informed for local government assets, including road corridors. We know that you're already having to consider this, and it will intensify without further action. Considering treating assets as integrated systems will lead to smarter, more effective and efficient investment. Resilience is not just an add-on, but it has to be central to protecting your service delivery and finances, as well as your community well-being, which is why we're all here. ERAD provides councils with the evidence, tools and decision pathways needed to act to become more resilient. However, we do know that councils need to work together to achieve more significant change in the enabling environment. And so rather than to keep listening from us, I'm going to pass to James, who is one of our core members. James is the Manager Engineering at the City of Holdfast Bay. With some final comments. James, are you online?
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so I'll just touch on some of the learnings that we had at Holdfast and some industry takeaways and how it can be transferable. So I may be repeating a lot that's already been said, but I think the tools for us and the aim for us was to be very practical for investment-ready decisions. And when we talk investment-ready, again, it's around those internal funding pathways as much as it is trying to get some external funding. With the RIC, we again took quite a practical approach looking at the hazard and then what asset impact and service impact came from that hazard, and then what sort of investment response could we make in terms of a treatment on the ground. So that's when we compare that, replacing like-for-like renewal with a resilient renewal treatment, and looking at that over the asset life cycle, as that was just explained. So that helps us identify what treatments are effective and under what conditions deliver the best returns. So depending on the circumstance, some treatments may be suitable, and in other circumstances they may not be suitable. So making sure that we get the best bang for buck when we deliver projects. And it also gives us an indicative cost of inaction as well, which is really important for making these long-term decisions. Then when using the adaptive change plan, that gets into the how. So how do we embed that into business as usual? As previously said, working with that existing governance, existing funding pathways and decision-making processes, and not to just have a one-off pilot or a study or a project, but actually embed that into the delivery programs and projects that we have. So from here, we're very much an ongoing improvement process and maturity process in that space, as seen by the traffic light report. It's not the end of a process, it's really the start of a process for Holdfast. But what this project's done is given us that roadmap and some tools to apply to embed that within the existing resourcing. As we've said, there isn't unlimited funding, so we have to really be smart around how we spend our money for that long-term decision making. In terms of the key industry takeaways, I think that this resilience work isn't just technical, like it's not limited to the assets or engineering team. It's very much a governance challenge and also an investment challenge for our organisations. We get that value from embedding it, those climate-informed decisions into those everyday processes rather than those standalone projects and studies. And it is scalable over time and a repeatable process with some of the tools that we have. So it's going to be an incremental process for Holdfast Bay to start embedding this within our budgets and capacity and resourcing. But I think it is transferable because, again, working within existing governance and financial frameworks, we haven't created any new frameworks or new funding streams to deliver this. And I think it's fairly similar with all councils in terms of how they fund and how they budget. Like we have our 10-year asset management plans, our long-term financial plans, and then our annual business plans as kind of our core funding streams. And working out how we embed this into those is really important. And probably the asset management plan, I think, is one of the key documents there with the renewal. So how do we embed resilient renewal into that? And it's something we've done before as, Australian standards change, service levels change. We do renew like for better or like for bond equivalent. And this is another example where we can do that renew like for resilient. And also with what we've done, we used the data that the council's already had, so our asset condition data and asset registers, and then we combine that with the climate projections that are available as well. So these regional and South Australian climate projections to apply to our council data for this. So I think it's very much still a process, but I believe we've set up a really good structure to move forward with this and to apply with some confidence, with some science behind the decision making to help for the decision makers make some decisions around our long-term assets.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. And the team have thoroughly enjoyed working with your team, so that's been excellent. So we wanted to leave enough time for questions and discussion. And this isn't just questions of the project team, but also of your colleagues at the City of Holdfast Bay, because sometimes hearing from them is more impactful or useful than from us. So, but we're very happy to answer any questions you might have or comments.
Maybe just one comment from myself. So can you hear me?
Yes.
David Russo from Wonkaparinga. Hi, James. I believe you used to work here before I worked here. Just a comment. I just noticed you still use the phrase RCP, and it probably would be good to flick your slides across to the new adopted phrase of SSP, Shared Socioeconomic Pathway. It's just a side comment. And then just a consideration for yourself, James, in the Holdfast, just the practicalities around the addition of, call it additional services within a road corridor, such as additional water sensitive urban design structures, etc., that these add on additional maintenance costs and complications for street sweepers to get in and out of the nooks and crannies that are created by these structures. And I just wondered if you found the tool considered those attributes in its decision making.
Probably the team that created the tool might be able to touch on that a little bit more. We did have indicative maintenance in it. I don't think we looked at rain gardens specifically. Some of the water sensitive urban design we looked at was permeable pavements and tree inlets, and definitely looked at the maintenance costs over time, plus the multi-criteria analysis of their benefits as well over that. But I think the Peter might be able to touch on this a bit more.
Sure. Thanks, James. Yeah, just to add to that, so we were limited in scope in terms of the number and types of interventions we considered for the analysis and quantification. The associated costs with interventions were, for some of them, we had a kind of a rules-based approach where, you know, the more costly capital cost an intervention might have has a correspondingly higher operational cost. We assumed that, so that costing was built into the tool in a more general way, but still weighting more heavily towards higher OPEX with the higher CAPEX of these resilience interventions.
Okay, yeah, not bit of a roundabout answer, but anyway, so then can I just ask with regards to the cross benefit? So if I touch on water sensitive urban design, so generally the more water sensitive urban design structures will have in trees, etc., and the capturing of hydrocarbons off roads and all of the extra nutrient loads from lawns, etc. So that has the add-on benefit from the stormwater discharge point of view, not necessarily per se to the road of having these structures. So how does James, when he's going tick, 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 I'm adding in all these structures onto my road, how does that benefit then come back to James, call it an eroding perspective, or as it doesn't, it actually then jumps across to the stormwater and that gives a benefit to the stormwater component? Just wondering how the tool works in that way.
Yeah, I think with the road, there's probably two ways that we can look at the roadiness and assets. And if we're making the assumption that it's going to be hotter over the future, so we're going to have more extreme heat days and the general temperature is going to be warmer, we can either apply treatment to the road to make the road more resilient to that heat, or we can apply treatments to the environment to make the road environment cooler, such as shade or water sensitive urban design, so that the heat that road's under is less and the road can last longer. So I think we did look at impacts from both of those angles. So we've said increasing trees, increasing permeability, and how did that affect the temperature of the area and the life of the road? And then on the other side, how can we make the road stronger and more resilient to hotter temperatures? And both of those were two different angles and different investment cases that we could look at.
Thank you. Jeff, you've had your hand up.
I did. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and well done to the team down south on the work, and CSIRO as well. A question I had was just in terms of the road reserve, the space available to do things. Has the impact of this kind of era of supersizing of vehicles played any part in that? Just to it's not a small issue. Obviously, I was reading some stuff the other day about the increase in the sales of there's basically small trucks floating around in suburban streets, and it has been an issue, obviously, with planning issues and so on, garage sizes and so on. Also, I've noticed in the undercroft car parks where sometimes the vehicles are actually poking out. They're sort of too big to fit in the bay. So it is a real live issue. I just wonder how that fits into planning, or what considerations been given to that sort of that trend, which doesn't seem to be dying anytime soon, from what I can see. Whether that's fit into the planning.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, no, that's definitely a real issue that we're seeing through a number of means through council. I think for this project, specifically around the size of vehicles, I think that was outside of the scope and it wasn't really a variable we were looking at. One thing we did look at, though, was the existing road dimensions and what we had within the carriageway. So we used existing council data in terms of trees and planting scenarios and the positions where we could practically plant trees within verges. So those future planting locations, we could only really plant trees where we had the space to plant them. And we didn't really play with the widths of the carriageways and the road reserve and the footpaths and verges as such. I'll jump to Peter just to confirm that the road, that vehicles and road widths weren't included in that in terms of the back end.
Pete, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to just Nick here, Shannon. A couple of these really interesting questions, aren't they? Because they're very right, down at the sort of the detail end of the spectrum in terms of parameters and inputs and variables you'd really like to cover. So it's not that we forgot about it or there were just limitations to what we could reasonably assess in the scope of the program. I think the questions that David and Jeff have raised are really sound questions in the sense that it's a very complex area. There's a lot of moving parts. So the toolkit that James and his team have got, kind of play into the specifics of the project and how that was constrained. But I think from your point, David, they're really interesting. And we wrestled a lot with the interface between the road itself and the governing and the stormwater, and where did stormwater and road stop and start. So I think these are really good questions that aren't beyond the capacity of the group to consider going forward, but just really weren't at the front end of the project or top of mind. But yeah, I think these are really, and what it does is give us, reflect on a reflection basis, think, oh wow, that's really, okay, there's plenty more that we could have, sort of chewed down on. So I think great questions, but just to say that the modelling and the tools and the analytics were constrained to those 4 scenarios of heat and flood and those road assets, and then within that, as James has said, not all the data sets are available at any point in time. So we did the best we could with traffic movement, vehicle numbers moving in and out of the council, where the study area had pedestrian movements, etc., etc. So we went as far as we were able to go. So yes, there's definitely going to be scope for additions, and I think hopefully the products and the tools that we've left behind would allow the team to introduce those parameters and those variables, over time into the program. So yeah, I think just to add that on as a comment. Yeah.
One element I would add too, we did workshop a number of different treatment options for that were outside the scope from a quantification perspective, but were considered more broadly. So one of them is the stormwater impacts, and there is a component in the tool that describes the full list of all those treatment options that were discussed and the associated benefits and beneficiaries of those in a qualitative, descriptive way. So they're captured qualitatively to a degree where they aren't quantified as well. So, but yeah, the great question, and it's a recognition that we're working within a system here, and there's these upstream and downstream, pardon the pun, impacts are really important to consider.
Absolutely, and this was a pilot project with limited time and resources. So we'd like to have done more, but maybe next time. Miriam.
Thank you. I'm coming from a state government perspective, so a bit more of a broader question, but I work in disaster risk reduction, and it's, you know, very hard to get funding for prevention and risk mitigation and to demonstrate kind of the impacts of that. So for something like this within councils, when a lot of the payoff is, you know, can be potentially like decades away, do we know yet whether there is appetite to spend more money upfront now when there is a good business case put forward? Like, do councils have that money? Are they happy to, pay more for a benefit, you know, in short-term cycles that's not going to pay off in their lifetime?
I think this is a question for our City of Holdfast Bay colleagues.
Yeah, I see this. I see a lot of similarities between this and the LED light transition that we probably went through about 5 or 10 years ago, where there was some huge upfront capital costs and then that 10-year payback period, and different councils sort of implemented that at different rates in different over different time frames. But I think over the last 5 or 10 years, they've all sort of got on board and seen the overall, not just financial benefit, but then the climate benefit around the LEDs versus those halogen lights and the energy costs and things like that. So I think there's precedent for sort of industry-wide changes, as long as sort of the business cases stack up, and some organisations are a lot faster to move on that than others, and a lot more limited with upfront capital than others as well. But I think some of the cases that this study provided, getting a 10% increase in asset life over your reseals, if we think of some of the costs of our 10-year reseal program, saving 10% is a fair chunk of change that can be seen and can be sort of quantified for the decision makers. But in terms of our appetite, I'm happy to pass that on to anyone else in Holdfast Bay who would want to talk to that.
I think what I would just say, Miriam, is that I think one of the reasons we were so interested in this particular pilot was the ability to be able to quantify that. I think when you talk about resilience planning and all the impacts of climate change, sometimes that can be, particularly for council chambers, automatically it goes to how much is this going to cost? What's the impact of that going to be? Even where there is a real desire to want to plan for that. I think what this started to help us realise is that investment doesn't necessarily need to be significant in order to get a better outcome. And so for us, it was really about how do we start to understand what that impact is and be able to articulate what that investment looks like in an evidence-based way. So I think, that's why we were certainly interested in it. And I was, like I said, really surprised in some cases where you could make a really clear argument why that investment was important and it wasn't going to be as significant as maybe we first thought that might look like. Certainly, I'm very interested as the CEO of a coastal council to start to look at this, as to roll this out and look at it from more like coastal infrastructure. I do wonder whether or not the same thing would apply if we're now looking at seawalls and other things. But I think there is a level of appetite, but I'm also interested in how we can use this to look for external grant funding. So there is certainly an element where councils need to look at it from their perspective, but both state and federal governments, I think, need to provide some support to local councils in terms of investing in this area.
Thanks, Pam. That's very helpful. I'm going to pass to Tanya, who's got her hand up.
I was just going to pretty much reiterate those comments in, I think it was Miriam's question about if there's appetite for this work. I think as long as there's enough evidence and financial evidence, I think councils are interested. And from what I've seen, we're continually improving our long-term financial planning. And this would fit into that. So, yes.
I'm going to, David, I know you've got your hand up. I'm going to pass to Russ because I think he put his hand up to answer this question. Did I, or I get it wrong?
Yeah, but also just to add to the conversation about it. I think one of the things that would be interesting to explore is, this focused on quite a small area, and from the state government's perspective, I think there would be huge economies of scope and scale if you went from one small location within one council to bigger areas across many councils. I think there would be many efficiencies gained through scope and scale. So that would be an interesting thing to explore anyway. Yep.
David first, then Stefan.
Thank you very much. I think it was James who talked to the cost benefit tool, the RRC tool, the outputs time series cumulative costs. I just noticed that the three costs that are shown on the graph all cross over the same point. I think it's, I was going to say 28 years out. So it was just to the left of where you had the vertical dotted red line. And that seemed to indicate to me, and you must correct me if I'm wrong, James, is that it didn't matter which option you chose, but by year 28, they all had the same cost.
I think it was actually Pete who mentioned it. I'm just going to put that in the chat so people can see what you're talking about.
Yeah. And just to confirm that that wasn't a cost benefit curve, hey?
Sorry, Pete,
is that? Hear us? I think we're frozen here. I might try.
I think you've frozen, but we can hear you, Pete. So I've put the chart in the chat so people can refresh their memories. Are you able to answer that question, Pete? Unfortunately, I think that's gone off.
Can everyone hear us? Or?
Yes, we're back, Pete.
Okay, my connection was stuttering through that question. I heard something about the cost profiles for the different surface binder types, cumulative costs, and where they converge. Was that where you were talking about, David?
Yeah, that's right. So when you look at that curve, that's not a cost benefit curve, is that right? Well, I was trying to understand it, that because when it looks like you're using different treatments, but when you get to year 28, I think it is, say it's 2 years back from your vertical red line, all those treatments converge. So it's highlighting to me, obviously in a way, maybe I'm reading it too simplistically. It doesn't matter what you do by 28 year, it's all the same result.
Yeah, from a cumulative cost perspective, yeah, that's what the modeling was showing. So it does have implications. So there's a point at which these lines converge and diverge at various points based on asset renewal cycles, and then beyond a certain point they diverge. So you're over the long term, you're going to end up paying more. Now, all of those relationships are dependent on the assumptions that you've put into the tool. So under which climate scenario, which sets of assets are you applying the treatments to, which treatment are you applying, and then the current age and condition of those assets. All those things are considered within the tool. So that's one output based on a set of assumptions that the user would put in. But those can be tested, stress tested, or use different climate scenarios just to see what the relationship is. So there is some nuance in how to interpret some of those results and the sophistication. But I think it's the understanding those trends and agreeing on what, or deciding on what kind of package of treatments you want to apply where and how, is you would iterate that through that tool a number of times to test some of those assumptions before making what you decide might be optimal.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question, which is you, Stefan.
I was just going to comment a little bit further on the question about, you know, whether councils, you know, the investment case here. So if anyone has another question, then I'm very happy to yield the floor to that.
Well, we only have a minute, so I think your comment on that lifts us back up to that scaling, which is where we'd like to end.
Okay. I think that it also depends on our ability to quantify those benefits. So for something like, you know, changing to a different binder that might increase the surface, the asset life of a road, then that's reasonably straightforward to model. And it's a reasonably simple financial decision that can then be projected out over several years with a return on investment. Where I think it gets more complicated and more difficult for elected members perhaps to support it is when you're relying on estimates of increased economic activity or amenity benefit or health outcomes and things like that that are just more difficult to model and perhaps more difficult to measure in reality. So when you're relying on those kind of benefits, then you're sort of up against a political reality that you might have a chamber that has some more short-term thinking that's, you know, more targeted around election cycles and so on. And I think that's where we do sort of struggle with this kind of concept. But as we get better able to quantify those benefits and do so in a way that is universally accepted, because there's a lot of effort going into that at the moment, then hopefully that will become more and more mainstream and more palatable to our chambers.
Well, thank you very much. I'll end this hour to say thank you to our partners at the City of Holdfast Bay. We have loved working with you and hope one day to do so again soon. We've really appreciated working with the wider Resilience South collection. And we've been fortunate enough to be funded under the Government of South Australia. And I would be remiss of me not to mention the whole team. You've heard a lot from CSIRO today, but we had Value Advisory Partners, Monash University, Swinburne University, and our colleagues at Adelaide University and the Systems Cooperative. So thank you very much all for spending this last hour with us. If you have any questions or follow-up that you'd like to make, please either check out our website, which I've put in the chat, or send me an email and let me know what you particularly found interesting, and I can connect you to either the whole team or those individuals that you want to follow up with directly. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Russ, can you stop the recording, please?
Okay.